Hello. Good morning or whatever time of day it is in your world. I realize I have not spent much time during my videos reviewing my sermon series lately. I'll be honest. Like the stereotypical preacher, I've been a little thrown off by having a strict time limit. Thank you, YouTube. Our lesson series right now is called Better Together. We're going through the letter to the Philippians. We're doing that because Paul is locked up. He's socially isolated for the most part and cannot get out and see his friends and act on his plans and live a normal life. Of course, to Paul, normal life is a lot more intense than our normal lives, if we're being honest. So, he's missing out on more than the occasional restaurant trip or an easy Target run. But we can relate. I think deeply, especially, to how much he misses his friends. My commentator explained to me that this is a letter of friendship. There are some technical scholarly ideas that go with that, but to be honest, we can simply feel the friendship as we read together. If you want to read together, we'll be looking at chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. And just listen to this from there. The Philippians hold Paul in their heart, and Paul longs for them, and he prays that their love would overflow. That sounds like some friendship. If I wasn't mistaken, I would think that Paul was singing some love song or something. Well, anyway, the point is that Paul knows that they would be better together. That's why I've entitled the series that. And we are also better together. The 2,000-year-old church habit of gathering together didn't happen for no reason. My actual hope is that at some point, even during this series, we will get the chance to be together again. Even though I realize we want safety first and whatever together means will be different than how it was. I originally hesitated to use the title Better Together because it's inspired by a love song by Jack Johnson of the same name. The first verse is pretty much generally about love, so it fit my series idea pretty well. I quoted it a few weeks ago. But I never intended to quote the later verses to you because they are just so lovey. Well, now that we've read Paul's introduction, we know how he feels. It seems like he's in love. I'd be curious to see what a real love letter would look like from Paul. So my question for today, who are these people? I remember in Stone Campbell history class, we learned so much about Alexander Campbell. Surprise. He's the author of the bulk of work that has become our tradition. And then one day, we read a couple of letters to his wife, Selena. Alexander loved Selena. I'd never learned about her in my history class, but geez, if Alexander was interested, and we've based our tradition around his work, maybe we should pay attention to one of the women behind it all. I'm not going to say the same exact thing about Paul. This is a letter of friendship after all, but don't you know that our friends help make us and shape us into who we are? So let's learn what we can about Paul's friends in Philippi. I should first mention that Paul is not just writing to the Philippians in general. He's writing to that church with the bishops and deacons. That's verse 1. It's the only time Paul ever does that outside of the pastoral letters, which are Timothy and Titus and stuff. I wish I could talk forever about everything, but for now, let's just suggest that if there's a problem with church unity, one of the major problems Paul's addressing in this letter, then it's probably necessary to reach out to the leadership of the church. Please notice that for Paul and Philippians, the bishops and deacons are with the Philippians. They aren't over them. Also in verse 1, Paul and Timothy are just slaves on equal footing. So are the leaders of the Philippian church. They are part of, equal to, not over the rest of the church. That's important because when Paul is writing to his friends in Philippi, he's not kind of writing to them, but mostly he's talking to the leaders who are actually his friends, who are over the church or something. No. He's got the whole group, every face in mind as he writes to his friends, which includes everyone. If you want to check out Paul's initial missionary journey to Philippi, you can go ahead and read Acts 16. That's where his friendships begin. The first friend he makes is Lydia, a wealthy and successful woman by the river with her friends. And he eventually befriends a jailer in his household. He meets a slave girl / diviner too. Good story, you should read it. The point is, like in most urban settings, there seems to be a lot of diversity in Philippi. Maybe we can imagine that diverse setting as we try and put ourselves in the Philippian flip-flops. Paul's friendship started with these people through a missionary journey. And by that, I mean by spreading the gospel. If there is a reason for this letter, a reason for their friendship, a reason for anything Paul gets tangled up in, it's the gospel. Verse 5 says he's thanking God in his prayers for the Philippians because they share with him in the gospel. That means two things for this friendship. First of all, it means that Jesus is the foundation for all of their common existence. Jesus is the common denominator. Jesus is what matters, first of all, for all of them. When we think about friendship, you become friends with someone based off of what you have in common. Secularly speaking, Paul might not have anything in common with these people. He might not care about their sports games, their holidays, their hobbies and interests. Who knows? All that matters, first of all, in verse 7, mutual sharing in God's grace. Maybe that's why Paul's language always sounds like everyone is on equal footing, because they all share in that grace equally. Now, I understand. You might not have even heard anything that I just said. It's just so common. It's just Christianese. Yeah, we get it. We're all equal in God's sight. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, God's grace. Blah, blah. I get that. But there's a little book called Life Together, written by a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's pretty small, and it's completely based around that theme. What's interesting about the book, though, is that shared grace in Jesus is quite literally what was separating Bonhoeffer and his friends from the Nazis. Now, that's not boring. His vision was for basically all of these German men to get together, hide in underground communities, and resist the Nazis. But the one thing that they would have in common, the one thing that was going to unite them, was the grace of God through Jesus. Not a better Germany for the world, not a better Germany for the world, not to win the war, not so they could go back to the way things were, but Jesus was the only thing that would unite these German men. That's not boring. That's life and death. And ultimately, for Bonhoeffer and most of his friends, it did mean death. Sharing in the gospel means something else too, that second thing. It's that word sharing that Paul uses. It's like participating in, partnering in. It's not just grabbing food off the same table, it's making food together. These people are friends because Paul showed up to a place and started making friends and making waves in the name of Jesus. Now that the Philippians know that's the best thing about life, that's what they want to do too, and they're grateful to Paul for starting that off. Imagine if someone came into town with a coronavirus vaccine. We would both always be appreciative that they brought it in the first place, and we would always be trying to spread the vaccine that was brought. We would be partners with the vaccinator. And we would be friends with them because they saved our lives too, and the lives of the people we care about. Quickly, to tag on to that, you'll see that verse 6 and verses 10 through 11 have to do with the future. Chapter 3 will be really talking a lot about the future, but for now, let me just say that it's not just their past and present that bring them into this God's grace friendship. It's also where their future is going towards. The gospel and Paul's friendships aren't just some fond memory. It's what the Philippians are engaged in now until the final day, until the end of the future. So that's a long span for a friendship. I think we're beginning to outmatch Jack Johnson in the scope of this love here. We've talked a lot about friendship over the last little while, but I hope that you've seen that Paul is gearing up his letter to focus around the gospel. That's what he always focuses everything around. And part of his concern for writing to the Philippians is that they may not be united enough to advance the gospel. Their disunity might be chaining them up more than Paul's own chains are limiting the gospel, which Paul's chains aren't limiting the gospel, as we'll see. So let me try and fit in what I think is the most important part of this section. These are Paul's friends, but he starts off this letter remembering them by a more important title, saints. Not just some saints, all the saints in Philippi. I circled the word all every time it occurred in my New Revised Standard Version Bible. It shows up a lot in this section. It makes me wonder what Paul is setting up his friends for. It makes me think that when he is going to be talking a lot about unity and humility later, that he needs them to know that it applies to all of them. They are all saints in his book, which is a big deal, and therefore his message of humility and unity needs to reach all of them. And if you're scratching your head about verses 9 and 10, this might be a part of it. Church disunity seems to happen when saints have a hard time agreeing on what is best, what is the most faithful and pure thing we can do. People can get riled up about what's best for a church. At the risk of ending this video near a flump, that's where I'll end. I love you all. Hopefully I'll see you somehow, sometime. Check out Pierre's video in the description to sing some songs together. And next week we will start finishing chapter 1. Peace. All right, we're not done yet. We've got a cute one that we have to see. Oh, not the best time. You'll see him next week, I promise.